Canada Opinion, May 25, 2013. Canada, the second biggest country on Earth, is a pretty strange place if you think really about it. It would take most people a while to figure out why, so I'll make it easy and tell you in my opinion why, backed up by facts. I've lived in various places in Canada for about 30 of my 40 years. Although I was born in the capital of Canada to Canadian parents, my mindset and upbringing does not fit the mold of your standard blue-collar Canadian white guy, so I don't fit in here. My father is Canadian-born, but is the opposite of most people here, and worked most of his life abroad due to his job. He is very educated, but not used to dealing with the average Canadians like I am, so has a different view of things. Given his job, he was used to dealing with the elite of Canada and foreign countries. My mom is German-born, and that had a huge influence on my life. When my parents first hired Filipino maids 33 years ago, I connected with the culture there immediately and fell in love with it after my first visit there. You have to wonder why such an absolutely huge place, second only to Russia in size, only has about 35 million people living there, most of them near the U.S. border. Yes, you guessed it, for half of the year, Canada is a vast frozen wasteland of snow and ice, from east to west and north to south. Most Canadians take this for granted and grin and bear it, so most locals here are some pretty tough and hardy people. If you don't like extreme cold, however, you will hate it here from about October to April. Spring and fall are cool, but summer is usually very hot and humid. The most mild climates are Victoria and Vancouver, where I live, and they are the only places I am prepared to live in Canada. The problem is I no longer want to live in Vancouver, so that means the only solution is to leave Canada. I think that if Canada were the same size but at a lower latitude, its population would be like the USA. Most Canadians brag about how big the country is and how it is bigger than the USA. This is true, but I would much rather have the USA as a territory to live in. It is only a bit smaller and has mild climates all year round in southern areas. Canada is like one big Alaska, and most of it is unlivable. Just look at the northern territories of Canada. The area is huge and only 100,000 people live there. So the hostile weather has a huge reason on the small population here. Just look at other countries of Canada's size, like China, USA, and Brazil. They have huge populations. Canada's massive size works against it, because it makes traveling aerial time-consuming affair. It even has 6 time zones, so going somewhere usually involves a long time and lot of money. So traveling or doing business here is a real headache because you have a small population spread across a huge area and a very hostile climate. Canada's leader is a woman and lives in another country. Most Canadians themselves are not aware that the Supreme Leader of Canada is the Queen of England. Due to this, Canada is a well-established matriarchy from the very top down, just like most of the Commonwealth and Anglo-sphere. About 95% of Canadian men are manginas and don't realize it. They think that calling their wife the boss and having her in charge is totally normal. In fact, in Canada, women's and men's roles are reversed from the natural system. Women are in charge and look and act masculine like men do in male power societies, and the men act submissive like foreign women do in male power societies. Most men here have never known anything else, and assume this is the way it is everywhere. If they stood up to their wife, she would divorce him and he would have to give up half of what he owns and pay alimony just like in the USA. So marriage here is fraud, but most men don't realize it because they are so desperate to get a woman they sign the contract and become slaves. Canada was recently picked as the best country in the world to be a woman. They forgot to mention that any country where it is the best place to be a woman is probably the worst place in the world to be a man. Funny how they never write articles about the best countries in the world to be a man, only the best place to be woman. I am now convinced that if Afghanistan is the worst country in the world to be a woman, Canada has to be the worst country in the world to be a man. The natives that were living here for thousands of years before Canada was discovered hate the white people, and always have and will. They hate all the other people from all over the world that decided to live here also. Just like in the USA, the British and French that came here 500 years ago decimated the native populations with war and disease, and said tough luck if you don't like it. Just like in the USA, the natives here live in poverty on reservations. They have a much lower standard of living than others and have low life expectancy, high unemployment, high AIDS rate, high crime rate, high suicide rate, high drug and alcohol rate, and just about every other bad statistic you can think of. If you were to go to a native reservation in Canada, you would think that you have just gone to a third world country. The native reservations are absent from tourist brochures and travel guides. To make up for killing most of them and ruining the lifestyle, culture, lands and history, the Canadian government gives the natives tax-free status and pretty much anything else for free. They also always get lenient crime sentences compared to others. This will never change. The natives will never like the whites or other immigrants, and the immigrants will never get along with the natives. The French people will never get along with the English or other people, and vice versa. The largest province in Canada, Quebec, is mostly French-speaking, and every 20 years or so they threaten to separate from Canada and become a country called Quebec, not a province. Every time Canada votes on if Quebec should separate or not, the separatists always lose, and Canada stay together until another vote comes along some years later. This will never change. They will never get along. For hundreds of years England and France were bitter enemies in Europe, and this continues to show in Canada, where they have political and language battles. Canada has French and English as official languages, so everything has to be in both. It's especially bad in Quebec, where they actually have a language police that goes around making sure that everything is in French first and then English. If you have an English-only sign, you face heavy fines and punishment. To realize how extreme the language police get, a few years ago the Quebec government refused to pay for a disabled Quebec woman's assistance dog because the dog only understood commands in English and not French. Canada is always trying to keep American culture out, an impossible feat when the USA is your best friend and next-door neighbor. Canada is trying to establish its own culture, and not have too much of an influence from the USA. This will never succeed. The USA is simply too strong and too close. Canada is always coming up with silly rules to keep American culture out, and Canadians are always trying to find new and creative ways to circumvent these laws. If you are an American and are used to things you can easily get there, you will go crazy here. Most things Americans are blocked or don't work here. Your satellite system is illegal here. Your video or audio streaming website won't work unless you have a US IP address. Most websites you bought from in the USA won't ship to Canada. Even the Super Bowl commercials are blocked. TV and radio has a 35% Canadian content rule. So for every 100 TV shows or songs on the radio, 35 have to be Canadian. A thriving underground market of ways to bypass all these laws exist. Most Canadians do a lot of shopping in the USA, and have P.O. box addresses near the border to have shipments sent to and then picked up there. There is really no culture. Canada is simply the British Empire manufactured kill and conquer country that anyone from anywhere in the world can come to and live in and say I am Canadian. Multiculturalism is simply a polite word for people from anywhere in the world living together, but not really caring about any culture other than their own. Most nationalities here stick to their own countrymen and avoid others. About the only thing that will bring people together is a hockey game. Every race and nationality usually cheers when Canada always beats the USA at men's and women's hockey, even though all the players are white. That's about the extent of patriotism here though, because the same people who were cheering Go Canada will drive across the border the next day to save $20 on a TV in the USA. This business of keeping USA culture out of Canada is nonsense. Neither country is any real culture. Compared to Europe or Asia, which has thousands of years of culture and history, Canada has pretty much nothing. 100 years is considered old here. The native culture that existed here before the white people came was wiped out long ago, and the shattered remnants live in squalor on reservations. Most Canadians have low standards when it comes to their appearance, possessions and women. You don't realize this until you go abroad, where most Canadians look and act absurd in foreign settings. I remember when I was living in Europe and met other Canadians, I was usually disappointed or sometimes horrified by their behavior or appearance. It is simply not the priority to look good or have nice-looking things. Standards of beauty are low, since people would rather have cheap things than nice-looking things. Most houses are big and ugly, and filled with possessions that they don't need, but bought because the bank gave them a huge line of credit. When the English and French pioneers first settled here a few hundred years ago, the top priority was to stay warm, have food and shelter. If you don't, you will freeze to death by October. This is still evident in the attitudes of people. Yes, you have all the same modern comforts you have in the USA, but staying warm, dry and federal is the main